So welcome to session 3, which is part 4 of my exploration of counseling methods, how I work with them, what I'm trying to do. So what I plan to do today is walk through the perspective I take. That is, this is not a chronological, I do this, then this, and this, but I have these points, and there are 12 points, that I kind of work with as I'm going. And I'll talk about what that means and how so. So the point here is not, I'm not going to give any cases, but we can discuss cases later when I'm not recording. But just simply walking through how I work with these theories, what I'm trying to do with them, what it looks like as I'm actually face to face with a client. So to continue. Whoops. There we go. So from my point of view, there are 12 components to practice. That is, when I'm working with clients, I've got 12 things that I'm kind of doing. Now, there may well be more, there may be less, it might be a little bit redundant, but I just counted 12 as I was trying to work out for this presentation what it is I do. And it starts off with asking questions. But what I'm trying to develop as a whole is a process of engagement, evaluation, and action. That is, for me, therapy is about finding the points of leverage in the client's life world so that the client can become more competent and have more agency in their own life. I'm not trying to achieve any self-actualization on anybody's part. It's simply about how do people become more capable, more functional in their own world? That's it. And questions are the core. So that's where I start. Ask questions. It's just keep that in mind at every point to ask questions. Questions themselves are not neutral. You do not ask a question for information. Well, yes, you do. But you also ask a question because it does things in the context of the client-therapist relationship. So one of the things that asking a question does is it intrinsically creates client autonomy. That is, by asking questions, you are helping people become stronger as selves. That is, a question just forces people into a reflective position where they are thinking for themselves, thinking in an important relationship, and they become stronger through that. Questions also do something else, which is really important, which is a question reframes the client's life world. And it isn't even the type of question, it's simply asking questions. Asking questions creates a distance between the client and their current conditions. That is, it begins to create a space between the person and what they've experienced or the world they live in. And that space then gives them room for critical and creative reflection. Because questions are really powerful in what they do to the people who are experiencing the question. And then also, good questions are about an opportunity to learn about the client, which I think is quite important, and also creates the context for education. That is, a questioning environment is one where then people start seeking knowledge, seeking information, which again is a good thing for therapy. So asking questions, it's just core to everything that I do. Then moving along, the family diagram. So there's a copy of an actual family diagram. I've actually modified it since I did that version of it. Family diagrams I find are, for me, an absolutely essential tool. And so I actually do an initial interview with clients just to gain some of the basic facts of for their family diagram. So ideally, it's more than 3 generations. This one, I think, is 4 or 5. That really helps you get a sense of the forces that shape the family. Who moved where? Who married whom? Who divorced? Who died? When did they die? Of what did they die? Really important functions. And then you can begin to map out the emotional focus and flow in the family. Once you know who's connected to whom, who cares about whom, who's supporting whom, who's angry with whom, who's cut off from whom, you really begin to have a sense of the way emotional energy flows about between people. Now, it's very much Bowen theory, but the fact that it's Bowen theory doesn't stop it from being real, and the family diagram from being a superb tool for understanding how these theoretical functions work. Then I also use it the same family diagram as a way of assessing parental functioning. That's really important for me. And then sibling dynamics. How do siblings, where do they stand? How do they relate? As you explore those features in the family diagram, you really begin to get a sense of what the client is living in, what kind of world that they've got. So the goal of a family diagram is to develop a framework for thinking about client issues and to obtain an initial sense of their life world options and obstacles. People live in these family dynamics. It's like you're building a blueprint of the structure of their world, the core people, the people who are most important. And once you know what the blueprint is, you begin to get a sense of what your client can and cannot do, where they can and cannot go. Um, it's a sense because it isn't determinative. People can break with their families. It's not easy, but with enough work, they can do so. And I've got interesting case studies in that. I'm working with a client right now. In fact, the client whose family diagram this is, who is really using the family diagram as a way of reorienting herself in relationship to the family so that she can actually do new things. She isn't bound by these patterns. Seeing them reveals, well, okay, so that's just the way things were. That doesn't mean that's the way things need to be. Very powerful stuff. So I'm doing a presentation in March at a conference on the family diagram and how it functions both for the therapist and for the client. Um, Important stuff. Okay, so family diagram, that's number two component. Always have a family diagram. Number three, build trust. I've really reflected when I was preparing this series on what do I do with clients, and I realize a lot of my work is building trust. That is, I want clients to trust me because the way I see therapy functioning, the fact that I, as a therapist, become part of the system means I need to be a reliable part of the system. So I need to be trusted. So what does that mean? Well, for me, it means being honest about my approach. When I'm talking with clients from the very onset, but all the way through, I'll come back to the issue. I'm prepared to confront you. I'm not on your side. I try not to take sides. I try to be really clear. This is what I can do. This is what I can't do. Good boundaries. That is, because the more I'm clear about these things, the easier it is for clients to get a sense of where they stand in relationship to me and how to trust what they're getting from me. And I think that my willingness to confront clients allows them to kind of relax, to go, okay, this will be okay. I'm not, don't have to worry that my counselor is going to be on my side, in my corner, and needing me to feel good or whatever. That is, yeah, I don't have to go there. And my sense is, or in fact, what I've been told by a number of clients, this is an important part of them actually trusting me is I'm not on their side. I care about them, but I care about everybody else in their world too. Um, and then I try to be genuinely curious. And I think that builds trust. That is, I ask, my questions are real questions. I don't have answers in advance. Well, that's not always true, but mostly I don't. Mostly I try not to ask rhetorical questions where I know the answer. I mostly try and ask questions where I don't know the answer, where I am genuinely curious. Well, what is this situation? How do you perceive? Are there other options? I think there are, but I don't know. Tell me. And I also really work hard at expressing my confusion and the possibility of error. That is, the issue is I'm a human. I'm a professional, but I'm clearly trying to be in the situation as a human, which means I can be confused, I can be misled, I can misunderstand. Um, I, Part of me is, and I'm happy to express it. Oops, I got that one wrong. I try not to be too wrong. Sometimes, I kind of get really wrong. And I want clients to feel comfortable telling me, no, you missed it on that one. Which sometimes leads to arguments. I recently had a client consultation where I was arguing with the client whether or not I misunderstood the client. And the client finally agreed that probably I actually did. But they didn't like that conclusion. But yeah, but I can be wrong. I didn't think I was wrong, and eventually she agreed I wasn't wrong. But it's like, but I'm prepared to. Okay, I make mistakes. I can be seriously in error, and let's just keep exploring. So the goal is to construct a good working relationship with the client, because building trust is really important for that. And it's also helpful for client progress. If the client trusts you, they work harder, they're more open, they're freer to explore. Really important stuff. So I'm a human, I'm there. I'm not trying to be this distant professional. I'm trying to be a clear professional and a human, a trustworthy human, a good professional, but recognizing my limitations. So that helps clients then go, okay, so we're kind of working together, we'll discover together, and they get more open. Number four, working on points of need. And by that, I mean trying to understand the client's view of the issues. That's my starting place. Like, what is it you sense? What is it you need? Where are you coming at here? What's driving you? Often clients don't actually have a clear sense. Sometimes they have a very precise sense. So I want to understand that. And then also, I try and explore with clients what are additional issues. That is, when something comes up, I'm reflecting on it. Look at it in terms of the family diagram. And then, okay, so is there something going on here? Or is this revealing that there are other life world factors that may be present that we haven't identified yet, that we need to bring up as possible issues? And I also try and review, how is the client self-presenting? Clients can distort information, even occasionally lie to me quite deliberately. Um, so I have to kind of, well, what is genuinely going on here? And often enough, I get intuitions, a certain feeling for the client. I try to check them out, but you get a sense of, oh, there's a need here. There's something happening. What is it? I'm feeling uncomfortable with what they're saying. What is really going on here? So it's like, what are the points of need? Really important stuff from my point of view. The goal is I want to understand the client's positioning in their life world. That is, what do they understand themselves to be? And then that's a tricky issue. And ideally, it shifts over time. But where is it? That's so understanding their sense of their own needs really helps get to that. Um, by understanding their points of need, and it also identifies the points in their inner system most open to change. One of the ironies of therapy is that many clients come to therapy hoping they can be fixed without doing any work. That is, there's a lot of hard stuff that has to happen inside. And by understanding their points of need, you as a therapist, you begin to get a picture of, okay, what are the points inside where you can begin to help them trigger their own openness to change, to doing the work. And then also from points of need, from a very initial point, you're identifying a preliminary approach to the client. Addressing their needs is always well, not always, but generally a very good starting place when you're talking to them about what you want to do, where things might go in counseling, what they can expect out of it. I mean, being realistic, but it's just very helpful to be always thinking, what are the points of need that are being expressed here? Um, Another issue, and I don't know if this is quite the right terminology, but it's what I use, is I'm trying to listen for the limits of the self. And this is a bit tricky because I'm not quite sure what to make of this concept because it might be one that I've made up myself. But it comes out of some of the reading I've done on the nature of the self and how we are many selves. So I'm really trying to figure out then when people show up in therapy, which selves are showing up? Is it a psychodynamic inner self child that's showing up? Is it my role as a, caring parent that is showing up? What is the self that's showing up for therapy? And it can be multiple. Um, and when you listen to that, then it begins to help you go, okay, so then what are the missing perceptions? um, it's like who's here because whoever's here, somebody else is not here. Who's not here? What are the client blind spots? And that's always fun. In initial sessions, I often find that I'm mostly talking to clients in terms of things that are obscuring the reality. That is, the client is putting up a kind of a presence, a self, and they're hoping that maybe I can see behind the self to the reality, a self that they can't even see. Uh, but there's another thing that I find fascinating too is what I do in this process is I listen to myself and my own blind spots in relationship to the client. That is, I'm forming an impression from the moment I meet them. Yeah, but it's a partial impression. Well, partial in what way? What am I missing? What am I hearing that isn't there? What am I not hearing that is there? So it's like very carefully, what is the self that's being presented as much as I can. And then, as part of the limits, is where is the client responsible and where is the life world responsible for what the client is experiencing? Again, this is part of my theoretical perspective, which says we are not masters of our own destiny. We do things in contexts. That is, we are responding to context. Context frame and determine much of how we think about the world, how we experience the world. So, when I'm trying to figure out the limits of the self, I'm trying to figure out not just where itself is being presented, but what that person can genuinely do. If they're a child, they're limited. A child living at home, limitations are extreme. That is, the helping the client become more functional, more effective as a child. There isn't a lot you can do. It's a lot of talk about endurance, about strategies to outwait till you can leave. And one of my clients, we're working on a 20-year plan for her to get out of her parental home, which may be what it takes too. We've been at it for 5 years, and she managed one weekend away. So I count that as a huge victory. Um, but is where is the client responsible? Where is it the life world that is really responsible for what's going on? And then also, one of the things that you have to watch for is what's going on with the relationship between the therapist, the client, and the life world, because there's a dynamic there. The therapist is changing the client simply through the relationship, and that then changes the client's life world simply by fact of the relationship. So, what is going on here? What are the limits? Is the client absorbing or are they transmitting therapeutic stuff into the life world? Um, are they caught in between, moving forward, moving backward? And then what is the therapist's role in that dynamic? Are they propping up the client or providing a foundation for the client to do more? What's going on? So it's like, where is the self? Really important. So the goal here, you're trying to determine the limits of what you can do as a therapist. It's important not to overstep client boundaries. It's like you do not want to push a client to try accomplishing things that their life world does not permit. This is not helpful. Mind you, I do it every so often anyway, but then I feel guilty. But partly because I have a certain sense of trying to push out the boundaries of what a client can be. So, but it's important to not overstep. So if I push out and I can get real pushback from the client, I try and relax my desire for their growth in relationship to the limits of who they are. And then the other side of this is also refining the therapeutic perspective. What's your long-term sense of the client? Comes a lot out of the sense of the client. It's like my client, we're on a 20-year plan for her to move out of the parental home. Yeah, well, that makes sense out of the situation, just being realistic given the framework. And then I'll watch. And will I change that sense? And will I suggest another plan? The answer is I'll watch. That is, if the limits of the self change, if the client gains more capacity faster, well, I'll push that along. But it's also the self is what drives the long-term possibilities. So who is the self that you're dealing with? And what are they becoming? How are they changing? Then, number six, systemic considerations. That is, people are not individuals. Again, that should be obvious already from the way I've been talking that people are part of systems. We are interactive components of worlds. So then that means that if you're working with the client, what interactions of theory and life world are likely to be most useful? That is, do you want to talk to your client about gender theory because they're trying to conform to a particular role model that they were given and they don't actually understand the options and potentials? Do you want to talk to them about the way neuroscience suggests brains operate under particular conditions? I do a lot of that, particularly around issues of loneliness and how this is a powerful trigger in the brain that's quite natural. That is, it's not about emotion so much. It is an emotional outcome, but it's about the actual interaction of the person and their world. Loneliness is significant and powerful stuff. So let's talk about the theory behind it. So that how are you and the world interacting to create this feeling? So it's like you're looking at the systems, the interactions. Um, and then one of the things that systems theory generates is that you need to experiment. In a system, you cannot know what's going to happen in advance. You can guess, you can hypothesize, you can have pretty good intuitions, but until you experiment, you don't know. And so that becomes a really important part of how you frame your thinking. That is, we're going to be experimental. Uh, it's also important to attend to the outcomes as they're presented by the client. Like what are they experiencing in their system? That is, it's not so much that you as therapists know what's happening. You have to get that sense of what is in the system of the client. I also then wonder about the impacts in their life world in the context of the theories, because I've got the theories running in the back of my head all the time. And I'll talk about that more later. I think that's point 12. But you've got to be asking this question in their life world, which theory seems to be getting at the issues most clearly? Which one helps reveal the most? Which one is most useful for the client? And then in terms of systems theory, always pay close attention to overdetermination, underdetermination. I love underdetermined points because they're highly susceptible to change. Underdetermined, there just aren't enough forces. You've got to actually manage actively to function effectively. But those are places where you can change relatively easily. And then also pay attention to areas that are overdetermined, where there's so many forces at work, it's really hard for the client to uh, make changes. But that's when you get observant, because in an overdetermined system, observation turns out to be a really powerful tool for finding the places when the system tweaks a bit, because every system is dynamic. And that allows the client to squeeze through if they're observing the overdetermination and the factors involved. So you want to pay attention to both of these. One, that's where you can make the change relatively easily. The other, you've got to really think contextually. So the goal here in thinking systems is to understand the dynamic nature of the client's life world. That is not static. It's always changing. So if you just think, well, there are these people and there's this stuff, you're wrong. It's dynamic, it's interactive. Every change leads to other changes. What is going on? How are they following through? Who talks to whom in which way? Really important information. And then another part of understanding the system is where is the pushback likely to come from? Systems don't always, but generally push back against client progress. Um, I know one of my teachers, Randy Frost, would say, you don't know, you're not making progress unless there's pushback. I don't quite completely agree because I think systems are more complex than that. But there is going to be pushback almost certainly at some point. From where? So understanding the system helps you understand where that pushback is likely to come from and help prepare the client and bigger ways of dealing with it. Very important issue. So I could spend a lot more time on systemic considerations because everything is systems. Really important to keep that in mind, but some other stuff too. Points of trauma. Not all clients by any means have experienced trauma, but many have. And oddly enough, they often aren't fully aware of it or even that aware at all. And then related to trauma is intense developmental issues, crises in their family of origin that might not be points of trauma, but sustained long-term distortions in what would be a normal developmental process. So I look for those because, well, they're important to understand. So as I'm listening to a client, I'm trying to note patterns, holes in the client's history because trauma often emerges as a hole in memory. If you really are interested in that stuff, look up trauma theory, lots of stuff on the way it functions in relationship to memory and how it is very much a protective mechanism in many ways. Uh, then I attend to the possibility of parts. Internal family systems I find very useful when dealing with people who've experienced trauma because trauma typically triggers parts. But that means the other way around. If I'm seeing parts of people emerging, different roles and presences emerging in therapy, then I go, okay, so is there trauma behind this? Is there stuff going on? So it's like you look for inconsistencies, micro expressions that suggest there's more going on here that's hidden. Um, but at the same time, one of the things to do is check for issues of neurodivergence because trauma and neurodivergence often have the same symptom structure. That is, somebody whose brain is just not a normal brain, and somebody who has experienced trauma can end up demonstrating very similar symptoms. So you've got to be watching that dynamic quite carefully. Your goal in doing so is to understand their developmental processes because I find that just so helpful to know how a person became who they are because it gives me a good sense of how they need to move on. And then also discovering the deep issues that may need resolution, the hidden things. But that's hard. If the client does not present their trauma, it's often for good reason. That is, there's just too much emotional energy there, and they can't cope with it in their current conditions of their life world. What I find often is you don't need to worry about trauma. That if the client may well have experienced trauma, but if you can create a trust environment where they're working thoughtfully at themselves, the trauma issues will begin to emerge on their own in not so traumatic ways. That is, the memories start being offered up, but not offered up as trauma, but as, okay, well, this bad thing happened when we were X years of age. And it's like brains want to heal. Our parts don't want to be out there doing wild stuff. We don't need to be in these highly energized, anxious states. And we don't want to be. And that means, given a therapeutic opportunity, we'll begin to reveal them. But I think that it helps a lot, though, if the therapist is kind of tuned to the possibility and watching. I always try to come up with a solutions outline. Now, I have to be very careful what I mean by that. That is, I propose a program of work that applies theories. That is what I'm talking to a client, particularly in the early stages, but sometimes later on, after it's 6 months or a year and we've made a certain kind of progress, I'm always saying, okay, what about, should we explore doing X? It would make a lot of sense based on theory Y that it would be helpful for you to do this X. So what it isn't so much because I expect clients to do that, that is, I'm simply trying to set expectations for the client. There are possibilities. There are things you can do. There are things that are helpful. And sometimes the client will jump at them, and sometimes they'll just, "Oh, okay, they'll sit with it." Uh, but I also think that it's really important to get a client's support for the solutions that you as therapists have in the back of your head. That is, I've always got solutions in mind. I mean, they may not be very good ones, and they might not even be even remotely correct, but I've got them there. So it's worth proposing them to help you get a sense of your own limits as a therapist, and also to see if there's client support for what you have in mind implicitly. They get it, they feel it, and they'll tell you if you're sensitive, listening. And always, when you're trying to outline solutions, keep in mind clients kind of who they are and what their life world limitations are. That's a hard one. I find, I mean, one of the things I think that's powerful about being a therapist in relationship to a client is seeing potential that the client doesn't see. I think that's part of our job, to see their humanity and the possibilities that's inherent there. Yeah, but you don't want to overstep what the client can accomplish. You want to be realistic of what they can do in their environment. Can be frustrating, and I've lost a couple of clients over my insistence that they can do more than they think they can do. Um, but anyway, I think it's important to outline something and see where it goes. And the goal is a solution helps the client keep focused on the life world. You don't want them getting caught up in their own stuff. That is, it's about living better. Now, sometimes they need to be really caught in their own stuff because that's important. But I think there's a normal drive for progress, a normal drive for human beings to heal and develop and grow. And by outlining solutions, I think you're implicitly supporting that drive. You want to hold those solutions lightly, but just by generating them, I think you're helping support that inherent drive. And I think it's important also that you create a sense of therapy as being about change. It's not about it's not about the client finding a resource to just sit and be more effective in hanging on to the present, to where they're at. Now, sometimes that is exactly what you're doing as a therapist. You're just being an anchor so that they're not blown away by their world. But ideally, you're helping them understand change. And that's why the solutions really helps give you a pull around both you and the client can get a sense of, okay, what might be done. And again, part of creating an environment of hope. Things do not have to be the way they are, not forever. What's realistic? Where can we change? Then supporting efforts of change, absolutely critical. So you encourage, explore avenues for change. I do a lot of work with clients, not every session. And I try ideally not to be exploring avenues for change, but exploring how efforts at change have worked. Okay? So working through the details of the change, helping them understand, well, this is what you want to accomplish. Let's see, did you accomplish it? So, and that means timelines, accountability. For next week, can you do X? And then observe. Okay. And that helps the client get a sense of, okay, could I? And then you get a report back. But there's a lot going on here. And that's why I put in this section on inputs. Um, because this is where I find I'm doing a lot of work in my efforts at supporting change. I'm doing a lot of thinking about the client, their situation, what they need. And so there are a lot of inputs I put into therapy around this. And I think it's worthwhile. I think it's the appropriate place to put therapeutic energy in. So I'm often proposing tentative answers, not because I expect the client to accept them, sometimes they do, but because I'm trying to provoke them to make their own answers. So, well, did I get it right? No, I didn't. And they'll tell me. And that helps them get clearer on their own efforts at change. I use a lot of extremes and reversals in talking with them about this. That is, okay, so what happens if you try that? Yeah, worst case, you end up as a bag lady. Okay, let's explore. Well, what happens if you're a bag lady? That's just, is that so bad? Okay, yeah, it's pretty bad. Would you live there long? Well, no. Well, okay, so all of a sudden now we've kind of framed out the possibilities, brought down some of the anxieties and helped encourage, okay, so if that is not likely, what can I do? So a lot of that. I do a lot of theory-informed client education. Bowen theory suggests that under these situations, this is what might be going on. What do you think? Or IFS suggests that the best way of coping with this kind of experience is to do this kind of thinking. What do you think? Um, or, a cognitive behavioral approach says it's time for us to reframe the narrative. So, what would happen? Is there a different way of thinking about what you just said? Is there a different kind of language that might be more useful in expressing what you went through or what you're thinking of? So, you use, and trying to draw attention to the theory itself, because I want clients to be thinking about theory to the degree that I can, because the more they can think about theory, the more they can frame out their life in relationship to what it means to be human, what human potential is. And ideally, go exploring the theory for the answers that those theories hold for their kind of situation. I also push, mostly gently. I think sometimes clients experience it as maybe a little bit other than gently, but I'm trying to be gently pushy, going, okay, well, what are you doing? What could you do? What try? And then and I say this kind of regretfully, sometimes it involves active listening. Change is tough. And active listening, that ability to do that standard therapeutic thing of, okay, I hear you saying this. Is this what you mean? Just helps people calm, refocus, and enables them to get back into the change dynamic a little bit more effectively. I don't like active listening as a method itself. I understand the dynamics behind it, Rogerian and yeah, it's a powerful tool. I don't like it though. I don't like what it does in terms of helping fuse therapist and client. And I don't think that's very useful most of the time. But the calming and refocusing capabilities of it, I think sometimes when a client is in the midst of change, that is, they're actually actively doing something. Yeah, it can be actually quite helpful to actively listen to them, to do that calm, reflective responses that help them calm and refocus. So important stuff. The goal of this is client experiments with thinking and behavior. And it isn't that they're going to change. The ideal is they're experimenting. And so you're continually reflecting with them. Okay, you tried this. What happened? And I'm glad you tried this. That's okay. So and now what? What did you learn? Where do you go? So that you're always experimenting, trying. Life is experimental. Life is not, it's about questions and trying to solve them. So the point is not so that clients, again, self-actualize, but so that they learn and expand their capacities, learn more about the world and who they are in it and what they might want to do. So, well, it's something I've found myself doing quite regularly with clients, then as part of this is reviews of progress. I'd like to check in. What is the client experiencing? Do they think they've made progress? And often it means me going, well, I think I've observed progress, and it may be explicit progress or implicit progress. That is, mere fact that somebody can ask the same question with more intensity means they've actually made an implicit progress. They haven't made any changes yet. But if they can ask with more clarity, yeah, there's actually implicit change. That is, something has actually happened inside that prepares the ground. And then you always want to note the value of the effort itself to celebrate that, hey, been trying stuff for a while and maybe, maybe not much has happened, but something. And then I think it's also a really good opportunity to reflect on the 9 questions. Where are you in relationship to this? Well, have we shifted that, or is this the question that we're now asking? Really important because it helps again reframe the client's own perspective on where they're at and what they're looking for. I think a key part of this is what Richard Schwartz calls being merchants of hope. That is, that he has this view that as a therapist, our job is to sell hope to the client. Uh, that is, help them give a sense of the positive is possible. They are struggling, and yeah, but better things can happen. And a review, I think, is one of those powerful places where you take stock, you step back from the struggle of the moment, and reflect on the struggle over time, and almost inevitably, you see progress. Not always. I have clients. I have one client who I'm in 6 years. I'm not sure he's made, well, I think he's made progress. It's hard to tell. Anyway, but one thing I note here is never positively distort progress. You will lose the trust of your client very quickly. If you start saying, oh, you've really made progress here, when in fact you don't think so, because you really can't see it, but you're scratching for something positive to say, no, not good. Say, I'm not sure I see. Well, do you see anything? Because we've been working at this stuff and I'm not really seeing much. And then you could say something like, I'm certain there's progress being made inside of you because, just doing the work changes things. But I'm not seeing a lot of progress currently. What do you think? Really important for a client that you stay honest. The goal, make sure you've got clarity with the client. This is important. You and the client both need to have a sense of what's going on. It's really helpful to figure out what are the indicators of change. And one of the things I find is I go into working with a client wondering about A, B, and C as the likely indicators of change, but it might be it's D, E, and F that are the actual indicators. And sometimes, to go back to systems, it isn't the client who's changed, it's the client's life world that's changed. That is, better things are happening out there, even though the client feels and perceives about the same. There are different things going. And then another factor is I really like client self-observation. I think that is an intrinsic process of gaining personal autonomy. As we move to being able to observe ourselves, we become more capable of functioning as a self, more capable of making our own decisions, which is so review does a lot of really good stuff. Um, 11, I'm not sure this is something, but just to keep in mind that always this stuff it's recursive, iterative. You go back over the same ground over and over again sometimes with some clients. You just want to review, and keep going back, refining, getting more clarity, noting that progress may well reveal new issues, and that the lack of progress may also reveal new issues. That is, you're coming back. You want to review all of the above as a therapist, go over the file, think about what you've done, and go, okay, what have I learned? What do I know more? Where should we go back? What should we do again as this process? And then last, and I want always to reflect on theory. That is, when I'm doing this work, I'm trying to make sure that theory grounds everything that I do. So I'm always trying to then to reflect on what is the theory suggest, what is the outcome I'm seeing, how do I work at that? One, so I can actually understand theory better, I mean, which is useful. But what I think is more important in some ways is that it ensures therapists' autonomy. The risk here is always of getting in it too far with the client. You are in it, you can't help it. You are in that relationship. But as a human being, this is a problem. We easily become emotionally overwhelmed, emotionally involved, and as therapists, we care, and it's easy to care too much. When we keep the theory in the back of our heads, it gives us just a drawing point that says, okay, hang on. I'm functioning out of the theory. I am a functional person here. I have a role in this system. I'm not just a person. This is not an act of a friendship. I'm not a spouse. I am not a child. I am a therapist. And it's theory that makes us into therapists. It keeps us with enough clinical distance to be really helpful to our clients without getting them just radically reducing the risk of becoming emotionally enmeshed, being caught in transference and countertransference. That is, keeping theory active in our brains really helps us stay give within that critical distance that is most useful for the client in making their own progress. You don't want the client worrying about the therapist, which happens unless the therapist can maintain their own autonomy. And theory, reflecting on theory, is the easiest, best way to maintain that therapeutic autonomy. So, those are my 12 points in terms of how I try and approach this. I'm going to open it up to questions and discussion, but I'm also going to end the recording here, and then we'll open this up to a discussion session. So hang on here.